Hi, my name's Bob Burrill. I was the pastor of a small church in Framingham, Massachusetts called First Assembly of God of Framingham for over 20 years. And you know, when you pastor a small church, you encounter a lot of situations that you were never prepared for in Bible college or in seminary, and I went to Bible college. I'm going to tell you a quick story of something interesting that happened in my pastorate there, and I think you'll really enjoy the story. But then at the end of the story, I'm going to share a very important message about an important need that I'd like you to pay attention to. And it has to do with Hurricane Sandy and the victims of that. But first of all, my story, and I call my story Emergency Call. Now, in the first year I was at First Assembly of God of Framingham, which was 1987, I used to get phone calls probably once or twice a week from a woman, and they would last maybe 10 or 15 minutes at a whack. I had never met this woman. I'm not going to use the woman's real name. I'll call her Darlene, although that's not her real name. But Darlene would call, and I knew very little about her. She had attended the church under my predecessor, but not a lot. She had attended off and on. She never attended while I was pastor. But she would call and she would say things like, "Oh, I'm so afraid of this. I'm so afraid of that." She had all sorts of phobias and all sorts of fears and all sorts of, I guess you'd say, neuroses and anxieties. And I would just try to talk to her the best I could and give her some scriptures and give her some counsel, give her some advice. I would, of course, invite her to come to church, but she never did, and she'd say, "Oh, I'm too afraid," or that sort of thing. And while I knew very little about her, except that she seemed to be pretty much a shut-in and have all these fears, and that she had attended the church a bit prior to my coming, I would say she sounded to be young. I pictured her maybe 23, 24 years old. For some reason, I pictured her very, very thin, or as some of us would say, skinny. I pictured very skinny. I pictured blonde. I don't know why, but that's what I pictured. I didn't necessarily picture, an absolutely gorgeous young woman, but I pictured maybe at least a somewhat attractive 23 or 24-year-old, very skinny, blonde young woman with all kinds of fears and problems and so forth. There was a woman in the church she also used to call. There was a woman named Chris that Darlene would call almost as often as she called me, and Chris and I would compare notes about it. But after a few months, one day Darlene called, and I was rather alarmed at this call, because on this call, Darlene did something she'd never done before. Darlene threatened to commit suicide, and that did alarm me. And of course, I talked to her about that. I cautioned her against that. I gave her, I guess, all the kind of things you'd say to somebody who's contemplating suicide, to show them why that's not a good idea. I mean, I didn't lambaste her or anything like that. I wouldn't do that. But I did caution her about it, talk to her, pray with her. And after that call, you find yourself thinking about it and thinking the person's okay. And I believe that was on a Monday I got that call. Because I remember the next day I kept trying to reach her. I did have Darlene's phone number on file and her street address on file, though I'd never been to her house. But I tried to call her Tuesday a couple times, and it just rang and rang and rang, and no answer. And Wednesday just rang and rang and rang, and no answer. And for probably about 3 or 4 days, I did that, and just ringing and no answer. And finally, I was really getting alarmed, because I'm thinking, wow, here's a person that threatened to commit suicide. She's not answering the phone. Wow, do you suppose she did something like that? Well, I went out to do errands. Darlene lived in Framingham, the same community I was pastoring in, although she lived on the opposite side of town. But while I was out doing errands, I found her house. I went to the address. It was, as I recall, a large old white house. And I went up to the front door, and I began pounding on the door and ringing the doorbell. And there was just no answer. There was no answer. I rang the bell and rang the bell, and there was just no answer. And boy, that really had me concerned now, because there was no answer at the doorbell, ringing the bell, pounding on the door, no answer on the phone. And I'm driving back, and this is, of course, pre-cell phones. So I'm driving back to the church, and I'm thinking, wow, I mean, is her body just hanging in there from the rafters or something? Or is her body laying on the floor or something? Is she dead in there? Did she commit suicide? And I'm really torn. I mean, I've never met this person in person, but should I do something? What should I do? And I just wasn't sure. And I got back to my office. I went in, I went to the phone, and I called the Framingham Police Department. And I told them the story. And I asked them, do you think a police officer should go out there or something? And they said, absolutely. We're on our way, and we will meet you there in a few minutes. I didn't really expect them to say, we'll meet you there in a few minutes. I guess I just figured I would call in the emergency, and they would take it from there. So I got in my car, drove back over to the other side of Framingham, and when I got there, there was a fire truck. There was at least one police car. As I recall, there were at least 2 firefighters. I think there were more than that. There was a fire truck. I think there were probably 3 or 4 Framingham firefighters. And there was at least one Framingham police officer, maybe more than one. I mean, this is 25 years ago, but maybe more than one. And they were at the front door like I had been, ringing the bell, pounding on the door, and nothing. And then after a few minutes, they walked around to the back of the house. And I walked around to the back of the house. And they proceeded doing the same thing. Pounding on the door, ringing the bell. And all of a sudden, what to my wondering eyes did appear? But the back door opened. And in the doorway was Darlene. And I will say, she was not a blonde, skinny, somewhat attractive-looking 24-year-old young lady. No. Darlene was overweight, at least 45, maybe 50. Really needed dental work. Really needed prosthodontic dental work. And I wouldn't say was real attractive. And I was just kind of shocked at the look. That all this time I'd been picturing somebody looking a certain way, and she looked nothing like that. And one of the first responders turned to me and said, almost sarcastically said, well, you wanted to speak to her. And before I knew it, almost in an instant, all the police and fire people just disappeared and they were gone. And the way I felt as I was looking at Darlene, I kind of wanted to disappear and be gone. And listen, Darlene was angry. She was very, very angry. And she asked me, what is the meaning of sending these police and firemen to my door? What is the meaning of this? What have you done? Why have you done this? And I was just kind of flabbergasted. Now, I did something then that I wouldn't do today, and that I actually haven't done in many, many years, which is I went inside her house by myself. It's a terrible idea for a pastor, or really any Christian man, to just go into a house by themselves with a woman, just to be alone with a woman. Pastors have been accused of rape and all sorts of horrible things. So I have not done anything like that as far as going into a woman's home by myself for many, many, many years. And it's something today I just would never do. But the world of 1987 was a little bit different. And it was maybe a little more acceptable to do that. I went inside her home. We went into the living room and sat down. And again, she was absolutely furious and demanded to know why I had contacted the fire department and the police department. And I asked her, I said, well, what was I supposed to think? You threatened to commit suicide, And I said, I'm trying to reach you on the phone. I said, I called you for several days. I said, didn't you hear the phone ringing? And she said, yes. And I asked, well, why didn't you answer the phone? And she said, well, I didn't feel like it. And I asked her about the mail that had been piled up. This is a detail I forgot to mention, but there was mail piled up at her mailbox. When I had gone and knocked on the door, there had to be 3 days worth of mail piled up there. The reason I know that is on the Tuesday of that week, it had poured rain, and this mail had obviously been rained on, but now it was a beautiful sunny day. So when I had gone to the door and there was this mail piled up, and it had obviously been rained upon and dried, that was telling me mail had sat there for like 3 days and not been taken in. I asked her, I said, why was there mail just sitting there in your mailbox for 3 days? Why didn't you take the mail in? And she said, I didn't feel like it. And I asked, well, when I ring the doorbell, why didn't you answer? I didn't feel like it. And let me tell you, I didn't feel like being there any longer. So I got up and left. I never heard from Darlene again. Never got a phone call from Darlene again. And so that was the end of that emergency call. I will say that night, as I ran a home Bible study, I told the story to the people at the home Bible study. And a man who was a member of our church just looked at me and he said, well, Pastor, you just cost the taxpayers of Framingham $500. So much for that one. But I do want to talk about another emergency call. And this is a true emergency call that it would do well for all of us to take heed to. I've been very concerned about what's happened in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. I live in metropolitan Boston. We got off very easy from this hurricane. There was very little damage, very few problems in metropolitan Boston. Within a couple of days, everything was fine. But if you've been following the story of how it's gone in the metropolitan New York City area, it's been very, very serious. Staten Island, parts of Long Island, parts of New Jersey are still absolutely devastated. And I want to tell you about a wonderful charity, a wonderful ministry called Convoy of Hope that you may never have heard of. If you've never heard of Convoy of Hope and you want to learn more about it, I really encourage you to go to this website. Go to www.convoyofhope, CONVOYOFHOPE, www.convoyofhope.org. And if you go to that website, you can learn all about Convoy of Hope, and you can find out how to make donations. I know you might say, oh, donations. What's it? It's another one of these programs that all kinds of people get rich and the people don't get helped. No, not at all. In fact, Convoy of Hope is a wonderful, wonderful ministry. It's called Convoy because they send in large truckloads, large trucks, 18-wheelers, just loaded with supplies. And where there's a disaster, Convoy of Hope shows up and brings food and supplies to the needy. They not only operate in the United States, but really in a number of parts of the world, including Haiti. They've done a tremendous work in Haiti. Convoy of Hope in the States is based in Springfield, Missouri. I'm planning to send a donation to Convoy of Hope this holiday season, and I want you, if at all possible, to consider doing the same. Go to that website, www.convoyofhope.org. I hope you'll make a donation. You can designate it for the victims of Hurricane Sandy. You can do that. And I hope you'll send this link along to your friends and encourage them to do so as well. And when there's a possibility that something terrible may have happened, don't let my story stop you from acting, because who knows? You might actually save somebody from committing suicide or from some terrible fate. Don't let that story turn you away. But I hope you'll have a great holiday season this year, and God bless you. Okay.